Hola.
Hello, this call is being translated.
Abuela, listen to what my phone can do.
Abuela, escucha lo que mi teléfono puede hacer.
Wow. Ahora dime sobre tu novia nueva.
Wow, now tell me about this new girlfriend.
Huh?
Tú sabes lo que dije.
You know what I said.
Language is no longer a barrier thanks to Live Translate with Galaxy AI on Samsung Galaxy S24 Ultra. Learn more at Samsung.com. Samsung account login required. Calls must be made using the native Samsung dialer.
If you went on a road trip and you didn't stop for a Big Mac or drop a crispy fry between the car seats or use your McDonald's bag as a placemat, then that wasn't a road trip. It was just a really long drive. Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.
At participating McDonald's.
Welcome to the Fantasy Footballers DFS and Betting Podcast with your hosts, Kyle Borganoni and Matthew Betz.
Welcome in. We're back, Fantasy Footballers DFS and Betting Podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Borganoni, and I am joined, as always, by Matthew, never logging off the best ball rankings bets.
Can you even imagine doing that, Kyle? It literally cannot be me, especially right now. I mean, we got one more day left in May. Let's make it count, people. But tomorrow is June 1st, which is not just a day. I mean, it is the day for everything. So yes, Best Ball Primer is live tomorrow. Best Ball rankings are already up. But I haven't slept in weeks, Kyle, making sure that every player is right where I want them to be so that someone in the UDK Plus wins Best Ball Mania.
Yeah, every night before you go to bed, I'm sure your wife, Monica, sees you over there. It's that meme. It's like, oh, I bet he's cheating on me. It's like, no, he's thinking about his best ball rankings.
Like, man, should I move Mark Andrews up one more spot tonight? You know what? Yeah, I will. That's what I'm thinking about before bed.
It kind of feels right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I have some players that, emotionally speaking, I want to move around, and I look and I think about the people that are best ball subscribers, people that are in our Discord channel, and I just say, no. I need to fight back whatever emotional feelings I have to put Terrace Marshall Jr. in my top 300. I don't even know if he's in there. I also was looking at a dynasty league, and I saw him out there on the waiver wire, and I go, I think for my emotional health, I can't even pick him up.
It crossed your mind, didn't it?
It did cross my mind. It's also at this point now where anytime I tweet out a question of like, hey, here's the stat. Does anybody know the answer? People always assume the answer is Keenan Allen or Terrace Marshall. They just assume that I'm like fishing for like this, and it never is. But most of the time they ask.
Hey, how much fab do you think it would cost to get Terrace Marshall Jr. on your dynasty team?
$0. Nobody wants.
They actually make you pay more against yourself. You're just bidding against yourself. But hey, I mean,
that's
what do they say, Kyle? Every year, right? It's the 5th-year breakout. It's so classic. It happens every year for these star players. So this is the year. I'm sure of that.
Yeah, I was doing some fantasy points per target stuff, and his is as bad as it gets. Like, it's pretty much the worst you could possibly do. Laviska Shenault was also down there. Not good. On this episode, Betz and I will reveal some of our best ball rankings, which are live in the UDK Plus. So in the app, if you're drafting, you can do it that way. You can download a CSV if you want our rankings when you're on Underdog, if you just want to play around with those. They are there. So Betz and I will go back and forth talking about the players that we are higher on. And at the very end of this episode, we will do a special edition of Explain Yourself, where I get to call out Betz for being a royal idiot for the way that he is egregiously ranked a player. I cannot believe, I thought you were a person that cared about others, and more importantly, thought about upside. Is that all you care about, is just a median outcome in best ball?
I mean, week 1 is all that matters, dude. That's what they say, right? Week 1 is where all the money is. You're just that mid player caring about the median outcome. You're like, oh, I want to get in the playoffs. I want to get 5th, 6th place. It's like, no. So there's a player, man. I cannot believe that you don't even care about his upside. And what's great is you and I don't even know who this player is for this last segment, which we'll get to. We kind of just said, you know what, you find someone in my ranks that you think is just way off consensus, and, I don't know why, and I found one for yours, so we'll talk about it today.
Yep. You can compare our rankings, ultimatedraftkit.com. This is the last chance to get in on pre-order pricing, rankings, primer, and some season-long player props, which leads me in to our quick question. You like that little segue? Professional segue right there. We have an article on the site where we give some season-long player props. We talked about Bo Nix, talked about Xavier Leggett, we took a Stephon Diggs one. They're all there. And one of the things that you can do with the Ultimate Draft Kit, which I think buries the lead, like the Ultimate Draft Kit isn't just you're in redraft leagues and this will help you at the draft. Like the projections we have in here win people leagues because you have 3 people who stat out every single team. Betz and I then go back through and say, hey, Jason, what do you think about this? Like I get where you're going here, but this market share is a little too big or whatever. And so one of the things that Betz and I do behind the scenes is we take the 3 ballers, we find the average of their projections, and then we compare it to the sportsbook. So in front of me right now, DraftKings Sportsbook, Underdog, if you play on Prize Picks, I have some of those in front of me, Betz. And the ones that stand out to me the most are unders, which in a projection is wild. Usually it's a median projection, it's going to be higher, and the lines from the books are going to be lower, banking on injury and the sort. So give me a player and their season-long player prop for receiving yards that you're kind of nervous about.
Yeah, one that stuck out to me when I looked at the guy's projections was Xavier Worthy. Now, I will caveat this and say there's a lot of moving parts currently with how many games does Rashee Rice miss with a suspension. We almost, I think, all agree like something is coming down the line. I've heard rumors of maybe 6 games, maybe it's up to 8, and obviously anything less than that would change the projection as well. But yeah, all 3 of the ballers consensus here comes out to about 50 yards under the total on DraftKings, which is 800.5. Same on Underdog and Prize Picks. And whenever you have a median projection showing 50 yards or more in this market of an under, it's usually a pretty good play. Now, it's scary, man. Xavier Worthy's talent, I think, is legit. You and I both liked him as a prospect in Dynasty season. But there are a lot of, mouths to feed, so to speak, in this offense. You think about the signing of Hollywood Brown. You and I have talked about him. I'm not sure how much he fits the zone scheme, of kind of what you have to do in the NFL today, but he's still another target, potential target earner. Travis Kelce obviously is there. Rashee Rice is going to come back at some point in the season, right? And just historically with Andy Reid and his rookie wide receivers, they don't really produce a ton in year one. Now, there have been a couple guys like Deshaun Jackson's done it with the Eagles. Obviously, Rashee Rice did it last year, but just in general, it hasn't worked out with some of these round 1 and round 2 wide receivers that have landed on Andy Reid's offenses. So I think there's a lot of ways where it just doesn't happen for Xavier Worthy. I think there's a good chance that in best ball, he's a guy that you want because of his archetype. But just historically, these wide receiver 2s and 3s, since Mahomes has been the starter, haven't really been all that profitable for fantasy. And this is a pretty hefty line at 800.5. So if I was going to take it, I would lean the under. I think there's just a lot of outs here.
Yes, I went through and looked at every single wide receiver 2 and 3 since Mahomes became the starter in 2018. So remember, these were Tyreek Hill teams, Travis Kelce teams. So whoever it was already locked in as the wide receiver 2 or 3. The highest yardage output was Mecole Hardman in 2021, put up 693. Okay, so I think what you're doing here, Betz, is you're saying, okay, could he be the one ahead of Rashee Rice? Maybe. But we've already seen Rashee Rice command targets, and really over the second half, he was their top earning receiver over Kelce, even before the playoffs. So you're betting on Worthy overtaking Rice. You're betting on his efficiency. You're betting on Hollywood Brown not being a thing. I have a problem. I just want to say I'm bringing this into best ball of where these wide receivers are all being drafted because it's all around the same. And I feel like you say this a lot, Best. One of these ADPs has to be wrong. Hollywood Brown scares me the most. And Worthy, his production profile is different. But there is a range of outcomes where this player is Mecole Hardman or, an upgraded version of that in this offense. So I don't know. I would lean towards the under. The projections all say under, and that's really rare for us. So yeah, this one feels really good. Have you been taking Worthy in best ball?
So the ADPs on these guys, like you said, are challenging to get there. Like, especially because when you think about the Rashee Rice thing, like, sure, he's going to miss 6 games. Yeah, maybe he misses 8 games. But like when Rashee Rice comes back, that's when it's going to hurt the most when we think about upside late in the season and when you want these guys to be peaking. that's when Rashee Rice is coming back into the lineup. So I find it tough on the ADPs. I will say you can kind of manipulate the draft room a little bit. Like sometimes if you take Kelce and then you snag one of these wide receivers, if Mahomes is still on the board, it's almost like you challenge your draft room and say like, are you really going to take Mahomes unstacked right now and miss out on one of his stacking partners? And sometimes people will, and you just move on and you try to get in the next draft. But sometimes people will let Mahomes fall like well past ADP, and you can actually get Kelce, you can get one of these wide receivers, and you can tackle on Rashee Rice 3 rounds later. I've done that. So, I mean, I just want to buy into Mahomes stacks now that they're cheaper than they really have ever been with Kelce.
Yes.
So I have been taking some of these guys, but it's only with Mahomes teams. And I will say on Rashee Rice too, just from like a best ball standpoint, it's kind of scary because the ADP is going to continue to be in free fall, and maybe you just wait and take him later. But like, he's one of my favorite picks right now because of kind of the idea of if you just treat him as a rookie, right? You think about that. Like, think about a rookie that's talented, that we already know he's talented. He already did it. So when he comes back on the field, we think he's going to produce. If he misses 6 games and he's your wide receiver 5, like, who cares, right? Like, when he comes back, it's going to be the time when he's peaking. So I've actually bought the dip a lot on Rashee Rice. I don't know if that's a contrarian stance or not. I feel like everyone's just kind of scared right now of the situation, but miss 6 games, miss 8 games, comes back in November, December and crushes. Like, that's kind of what you want from young wide receivers anyway, and we already know he's good.
Yeah, I think it makes sense. It's not an injury dip that you're buying where you're hoping they regain their form. It's, a suspension. So we've seen that with players. Kamara last year, he came back and was the running back 2 in total points scored, for like a 12-week stretch. So I do agree. Like, we'll talk more about Kelce Mahomes later this episode because the price is different. I mean, you're not paying round 1 for Kelce. You're not paying, round 2, round 3 for Mahomes. So it can work this year, and that's just so different than in previous years. I want to bring up Zay Flowers, and maybe you can call me out because I think I've not been a Zay Flowers guy. If you remember last year on the Dynasty podcast, I was like, don't see it, older prospect. There's a number of things I didn't love. His metrics behind the scenes from last year were fine. Target share wise, 24%. Targets per route run, 21%. Yards per route run, 1.64 is a little underwhelming for this player. And so his line right now is at 925.5 on Underdog and on DK. I would take the under. Last year, he averaged 54 yards per game. A lot of that was with Mark Andrews out. And when you think about Zay Flowers, you would kind of pencil him in as like, this is a smaller slot player, but he plays outside. Last year was just 31% of his routes were in the slot, and Lamar was almost perfect when targeting the slot position last year. It was 16 passing touchdowns, 0 INTs. You're going to see a lot more Mark Andrews, who is their slot wide receiver. Their team was also weird because he caught a lot of deep passes. Rashad Bateman caught 1 of 13 on 20-plus air yards. I know you're a big Rashad Bateman guy, but in the intermediate area, 11 to 19 yards, which is, I would say, the most telling place on the field. If you can see players slay there, Bateman actually outcaught Zay Flowers last year in reception. So there is a little bit of difference where I think people think Zay Flowers is just ascending. There is no way that I will pay his best ball cost, man. 38th overall. I'm just going to say might be the most egregious price on the board. Like, I hate it. Other than Sam Laporta, he's a player that I've like almost off my board in my rankings. It's also the highest Ravens wide receiver ADP in best ball era, going all the way back to 2015. They haven't had a ton of wide receivers, but this is really high. It's higher than Mark Andrews. It's higher than Lamar Jackson, which makes no sense to me. So Zay Flowers is somebody that I'm just going to lean into the under, lean into our projections, which averages out at 875. And maybe I have some bias, but I'm just going to take an under here.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense to me, especially when you consider, in year 1, and certainly we should leave our mind open to the idea that he's going to grow as a player and his role is going to expand as far as where he sees targets and how he runs routes. But if you remember, it was like in the first 6-7 weeks, like a ton of his production was like, okay, quick hitter on a screen, yards after the catch, go. It wasn't really these downfield routes, and you did see him develop a little bit later in the year. So obviously I think he can do that as time goes on. But the big issue is Mark Andrews is the team's wide receiver 1, I think. And, last year, a lot of people were on that. That was right until he, of course, had the ankle injury. We'll talk about it today. I'm going right back to the well. And naturally, that does have me a little bit lower on Zay Flowers. From a best ball standpoint, I think the ADP is just an underdog wide receiver thirsty issue, right? Like every wide receiver is pushed up and you're like, am I really going to take Zay Flowers?
I hate it so much.
In the back of the third round? Like that seems crazy to me. Sometimes that's where he goes. But at the same time, if you miss out on a few wide receivers and you're behind the 8 ball, like I get it. So I understand why he goes there. But I do agree, like when we look back at the end of the year, you're like, that was very expensive for a player that probably isn't even the highest target earner on his own team.
I look at all the players going around him in best ball: Travis Kelce, Travis Etienne, Tank Dell, Josh Jacobs, T. Higgins, Lamar Jackson, Trey McBride. I
would take all those guys.
I know you're not a big Josh Jacobs guy, but like all of those players feel like building blocks for me, where Zay Flowers is a massive projection of he's going to take a step in yardage, all of these things. So I'm out on him. And if you want to, with the Ultimate Draft Kit, you can compare all of those. Like I'm looking in front of us, our Stephon Diggs one. You use the projections and we're able to take an under there. There's a couple more. Lad McConkey is another one that scares me, dude. I'm getting more and more scared of Lad and where he's going. The Chargers, man, I was writing up their stackability for the Best Ball Primer, and I was like, this team's weird. You have Lad going at a certain spot that feels a little high. Then you have Herbert way later. Then you have Gus Edwards. Like, I don't think anybody knows what to do with the Chargers, and yet they're projected for 10 wins.
Yeah, and they've got, I think, off the top of my head, the second easiest strength of schedule in the league. So the path is there.
Yeah, it is. It's crazy. Let's get into our best ball rankings.
Best Ball Bonanza.
Let's first explain the process for making best ball rankings. It's not just one of those things where you open up a spreadsheet and you say, I want to rank this player here because I like them and I think it makes sense. Normally, we tell people never, ever, ever draft from a top 200 or 300 list for your redraft leagues. Like, don't do it. We usually talk about a tier-based approach, and you can still approach it that way in best ball, but in best ball, your draft position and the way that you're drafting is usually volume-based. I have the 7th pick in this draft, but I'm also at the same time picking 4th, and so you have to make different decisions, but ADP is everything because that is the list that people are drafting from. So 12 people are in your draft, and I would say at least 4 or 5 of them are just going straight off of what Underdog says. They haven't looked at anything else. They're just jumping in. They're having fun, but you are a smarter person. So we don't want to stray too far from ADP, and studies have kind of shown like you don't want to just jump ahead 15 spots. But I think the goal for us is to explain how these are different than redraft and maybe give some do's and don'ts before we get into it. So any specific things you want to talk about, Betz, of how best ball rankings should be treated differently than, dynasty rankings or redraft rankings?
Yeah, I think best ball rankings are so tough, right? Because there's, 7, 8 different factors when you think about who I'm going to take with this pick. One of them is, like you said, ADP. Like you said, there's so many studies that have been done over the last 3 or 4 years that show, if you reach too far on a player, generally that's not great for your advance rate. It's not a good strategy long-term. So our rankings are tied a little bit to ADP where, I've been vocal. I'm not a huge Josh Jacobs guy this year, but it's like, I'm not going to put him 70th overall, obviously, right? Like if he falls far enough to the 40s, like sure, I might take some Josh Jacobs there. So you do consider ADP when you rank these guys because it does matter. The market, especially as we get into July and August, does become pretty efficient. So we want to use it to our advantage. The other thing with rankings that I kind of hate, they're fun to talk about, so I like it at that aspect, but it's very tough because who am I going to take here? The player I ranked higher, or hey, I already have this guy's quarterback. Like I kind of want to stack because I know how important that is. I'm going to take that guy instead. So sometimes rankings, I think if people draft off them too rigidly, can be detrimental to your strategy and your advance rate. Because again, we're thinking about correlation. We just want to minimize what we got to get right. If you're stacking, if you're doing team stacks, even without the quarterback, that's good for you. So sometimes I'll flip a rank a little bit. Even though I have a guy lower, I'll take his counterpart just because I have a teammate to complete a stack. So yeah, rankings are tough for best ball. I think the goal for me is to let people know where I have stands on. And really, when I do that with ranks, doesn't mean you got to take the guy where we have them ranked. Like if I have guys ahead of ADP or something, just know like when I get on the clock and I'm in that kind of 4 to 5 pick window of where that guy could be ADP wise, he's a target for me. That's kind of how I use it.
Yes. We also need to remember that in best ball, it's all about points added to a roster. So you're not getting the full amount. I say this almost every single year, but you're not getting 100% of a player's points unless it was Cooper Kupp from 2021, where it was just like you were getting his score every single week. So for wide receivers, there's a reason they get pushed up the board, because in this format on Underdog, you're starting 3 wide receivers and a flex, and often we say we want a wide receiver to hit the flex. We talk about that in DFS all the time. Like, that's where you get these crazy outcomes. So some quick do's and don'ts is we have a list for you. We rank players all the way up to our top 300, but you're probably not drafting 300 players. Like, some sites do have extended ones where it's a little bit longer, but the list is a reference. It's not gospel. Like, you have to take these players here. Just because I have a certain player, Antonio Gibson, ranked ahead, like, I can wait actually 2 or 3 rounds in my rankings to see Antonio Gibson. Also, I need to give a shout out to, I had to make sure I wasn't crazy with Antonio Gibson, because you said, we brought him up last year and the year before. It's like we're doing the same thing every single year. And shout out to ETR Establish the Run. They also had Antonio Gibson as their second highest running back compared to ADP. Made me feel less crazy because they're smart guys, right?
Yeah. I mean, I get it. I'm not going to be shocked, though, at the end of the year when my wife says, hey, how did best ball season go? And I say, well, I took a lot of Antonio Gibson, so, ipso facto, we need another job. I'm not going to be shocked when that happens. But hey, Kyle, it's all about the process, right? That's what you say.
Yeah, on the bankruptcy claim, it just says it was Gibbs season, and it didn't go so hot. You can also take our rankings and copy them from the website, copy them from the app, and CSV them, compare them, make your own tiers. A lot of times I tell people, like, you can take what we do or what Andy, Mike, and Jason do, put it in your own Google spreadsheet, and then add a column for yourself if you want to. If you want to have a crazy Friday night, like, oh, I'm gonna rank all top 300 players, like, go for it. It also shows you where teams are ranked, and that's what we have in the Best Ball Primer. Is you can look at any team in there. So I was just going through the Bears. It's like, okay, well, these wide receivers are pushed up, but then you get Caleb Williams, pick 100, and you can kind of have this backdoor stack, hoping that as a QB2, he has the upside that you need. So you can look at teams that way. I'll say this, rankings don't really take into account your roster construction. So you're on the clock, you're in round 6, and it says, hey, this running Dave Montgomery, I don't know, is highest in our rankings, but you've already taken 3 running backs because you're a dodo. Like, don't follow the rankings, right?
Yeah, at that point, pivot quickly to someone else or another position.
Pivot.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a great point. Roster construction is one of the other things I was talking about, where it's like, I'm considering stacks, I'm considering ADP, I'm considering what I've already done, right? And that's a great point. Is like, yeah, I've taken 6 wide receivers out of the gate. The next player on the rankings list is a wide receiver. It's like, you don't need that guy if you're drafting as if you're correct, which you should be doing. So yeah, of course, take into account roster construction and what you've already done.
Yeah, pinned at the top of the Best Ball Primer, we have articles showing you roster construction, Betz' 0 RB targets, other things that we'll be adding over the summer. So you can find that there. Let's take a quick break, and we'll talk about our rankings.
Hola.
Hello, this call is being translated.
Abuela, listen to what my phone can do.
Abuela, escucha lo que mi teléfono puede hacer.
Wow. Ahora dime sobre tu novia nueva.
Wow, now tell me about this new girlfriend.
Huh?
Tú sabes lo que dije.
You know what I said.
Language is no longer a barrier thanks to Live Translate with Galaxy AI on Samsung Galaxy S24 Ultra. Learn more at Samsung.com. Samsung account login required. Calls must be made using the native Samsung dialer.
Salute big savings this Memorial Day with Blinds.com. Upgrading window coverings can be a minor project with a major impact, and Blinds.com makes it easy. Choose premium blinds, shutters, and outdoor shades, just in time for summer fun. Get unlimited window treatments installed for one low cost, all backed by Blinds.com's 100% satisfaction guarantee. Shop Blinds.com's Memorial Day sale now for up to 50% off, plus premium doorbusters. Save up to 50% at Blinds.com. Rules and restrictions may apply.
The players that we're going to highlight today are guys that we are ahead of market compared to Underdog's ADP. So we'll give a couple quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers, and tight ends. And then at the very end, we will get to explain ourselves and why both of us are not that smart. So Betz, start us off with a quarterback that we are in yet again for?
Well, last year, you had to do some projection, right? It was like, we've never seen this guy play, but this was the most athletic quarterback we have ever seen at the Combine. So let's just hope this is not Trey Lance 2.0. Let's hope he gets on the field, A, and B, hope that he is awesome, and he was. And that was Anthony Richardson, who, I've got as my quarterback 5, currently goes off the board at quarterback 6. This is more of just embrace what you saw, right? It was a small sample size. You can't really argue with that. But the dude led all fantasy quarterbacks in points per dropback. He had 20 carries in his 2 games played. 13 of those carries were designed. So, I mean, what are we doing here, right? Like, we're taking this guy after C.J. Stroud, which we love Stroud, but Anthony Richardson could very well finish as the overall quarterback 1 this season. And I think you're getting a little discount on the fact that, yeah, he's coming off the shoulder injury. Yeah, we only saw him play a couple of games. Like, in my opinion, Anthony Richardson's probably a round too cheap based off his ability to add points to your roster. So I plan on making Anthony Richardson my highest exposure quarterback this year. When you look at the scheme with Steichen, so good, man. I mean, what he did with Justin Herbert was great. What he did with Jalen Hurts was great. What he did with Anthony Richardson, a small sample size, was great. They came out of the gates firing, Kyle. I remember talking about that in DFS. It was like, dude, they're literally running at a top 10 pace with a rookie quarterback who a lot of like draft analysts had said at the time, Richardson's kind of a raw prospect. He needs to develop as a passer. And Steichen was like, no, we're going to go as fast as possible. And they did. And then you saw him just shift and say, okay, let's just do what works well with Gardner Minshew. And the offense was great. Like, I trust Steichen so much that they're going to get this thing going in the right direction. And then you also think about the weapons, right? Like, they re-signed Pittman. We love that. Josh Downs, I think, could take a step forward in year 2, and he's fine out of the slot. And then you replace Alec Pierce with A.D. Mitchell, who, we had some issues with his overall profile, but obviously is an upgrade on Alec Pierce. So I think it's all there for Anthony Richardson. I think he's a little bit too undervalued right now, and man, he's so easy to click the button on in round 5. Absolutely love Anthony Richardson this year as an elite quarterback.
Yeah, we made this argument on the main show. Mike and I talked about this a lot because we've been in on Anthony Richardson from a dynasty view, but you'd rather be a year too early on these quarterbacks. Like, you need to take the small sample size because that's the biggest pushback. Oh, we saw 4 games. Only 2 of them he actually completed. We had a similar situation with Lamar Jackson his previous year where he was completing 52% of his passes. He led them down the stretch, but it was like, is this guy going to be an NFL quarterback MVP the next year? Same thing with Jalen Hurts, right? I think it was a 4-game sample size at the end of the year. He ran the ball a ton, and Jalen Hurts is never going to be a 30, 35 passing touchdown type of guy. It doesn't matter for fantasy. So what would you say his ceiling is for passing touchdowns? Just give a range, but I like, can he get to 26?
The number that came to my head was 27 as like best case scenario, probably is somewhere in that range, 25 to 27. So I think that kind of hurts like the stacking partners a little bit, that I don't know that.
That's my biggest question.
Yeah, with Richardson, I'm not like, okay, I want to take Pittman early, and then I also want Richardson, and I also want Downs, and I also want Mitchell. Like, we do want correlation, but I'll probably max it with 2 pass catchers just because I think it's tough to see him supporting 3 that you really need. But man, I mean, the nice thing about him too is like, even if you miss out on Pittman, and obviously I prefer to stack him with Pittman because he's the top option, but if you do miss out, it's like, I'll tack on Josh Downs later as like my wide receiver 6. That's fine. I don't love A.D. Mitchell, but he's been falling a little bit in drafts, and he's totally fine as your wide receiver 5 if you already have some studs early. So yeah, there's so many ways to play it with Richardson that it makes it work pretty nicely.
Yeah, I don't mind Jelani Woods and a 3 tight end build. Now they have like 20 tight ends, it feels like.
I was going to say, are you sure he's the one you want?
Who knows? I saw a blurb the other day that he was looking like the lead tight end, which might not mean anything. Okay, I'll just say this. Josh Downs is buried in my rankings. Like, I haven't been taking any Josh Downs. He's Jamison Crowder, and you need an outlier touchdown season. He's on the wrong team, in my opinion. Josh Downs, if he was, let me find another team that like just throws the ball a ton. Like if he was on the Bengals and as like Tyler Boyd's replacement, it's like, oh, this is interesting, but I just don't think there's going to be enough volume for his type of output. But I do have A.D. Mitchell ahead. Pittman, I'm always in. Would you stack Taylor and Richardson together or just nah?
So this is what I've actually thought about. And I think if you're betting on the Colts to beat their win total, to win the division, to make the playoffs, they win 10 plus games, like there's a good chance they're scoring a ton of touchdowns. And those guys on a week to week basis will be negatively correlated. but across the season, they'll be positively correlated. So I do think it's okay. Obviously, you're not stacking them as if like Richardson's going to throw the ball to JT for a touchdown, but just saying I'm betting on the Colts, I'm betting on Steichen, this is going to work out. I think it's fine. It's not necessarily my preference, but I was in a draft last week and I took JT in round 2, and then Pittman fell to like the back of round 4. I was like shocked. So I took Pittman at the turn with Richardson and I completed the stack that way. So just be flexible with your draft. I think it's possible. Like I said, not targeting it, but I'm totally fine with it.
All right, I'm going to give a quarterback that is a little scary to come out on this podcast and say, hey, I'm ahead of market. In fact, I have this player as a top 100 player, the 100th overall. But Trevor Lawrence, still true. Trevor Lawrence had the 5th most dropbacks among quarterbacks last year. If you tried to play Trevor Lawrence or you bet on Trevor Lawrence last year, it was so bad. He had 21 passing touchdowns, which ranks 104th out of 108 quarterbacks with 4,000 plus passing yards over the last decade. That's not good. Trevor Lawrence has averaged just 19.3 passing touchdowns per game, and last year he had just 1 3-touchdown game. So Trevor Lawrence in best ball was terrible last year. There's also a problem that if you look at what he did last year, he threw to his first read 77.3% of the time. That's per fantasy points. That was the highest rate in the league. They were the only team in the league that had 4 players that had a first read target share of over 21% each. So Ridley, Ingram, Kirk, Zay Jones, he basically said, this is the play and I'm throwing to you. So the ball was spread out. But I think more importantly, the thing lacking from that team was explosive plays. Like you look at the roster and you go, okay, Ingram, dependable. And he got a ton of checkdowns. Christian Kirk, super dependable, but you're not thinking of the explosive plays. So what do? They add Gabe Davis, I get it, insert laughter, and Brian Thomas Jr., which is a different look for this defense. They had aging Calvin Ridley, aging Zay Jones, and the one thing that Trevor Lawrence did do well last year is that he actually tied Purdy for the most 20-plus air yard touchdown passes. So it's weird to think about his season last year and think like, wait, he had 21 passing touchdowns, but over half of them were deep ones. Why was he so bad? Well, he was so bad because in the intermediate area, which I talk about every single podcast, it was bad. His completion rate, I'm really sorry I got to read these names off. His 47% completion rate in the intermediate area was better than only Tommy DeVito, Bailey Zappi, and Will Levis.
Oh, no. Oh, no.
It was bad. It was really, really, really bad. So why do I bring up all that stuff? Because I think Trevor Lawrence right now is being drafted at his floor at QB 15. I have him ranked as QB 13, so I'm not like that far off of consensus, but I think this offense and where it went bad last year was a lot of turnover plays that year to year just doesn't happen. You can look at INT rate, like Jalen Hurts last year. It was bad. It's not going to be that bad this year. Dak was really bad a couple years ago, was great last year. INT rate's not one of those things that I'm ever worried about. I think this team has enough playmakers to make a leap, and I love the options because Trevor Lawrence is another backdoor guy. Like, you can take ETN and stack him with Lawrence. I mean, those dudes have been playing together for what, like 6 years, 7 years together? Keep them together. But you love Christian Kirk. We might be talking about on this podcast. I just took Brian Thomas in a draft as my wide receiver 4. Felt totally fine where I was taking him. I already had my studs. And then you still have Evan Ingram. Gabe Davis is appropriately priced this year, finally, where he's just buried there. I'm not really taking much Gabe Davis, but I love the way that I can stack this team as a secondary stack. I'm not looking at Trevor Lawrence to be my QB1, but as a QB2, I think there's room for him to finish as QB6 or 7. He's going to rush, 3 or 4 touchdowns in. I think it's in the range of outcomes for him to beat this ADP and be a player you need. So I'm ahead on Trevor Lawrence, and I'm believing that a lot of these metrics from last year aren't just going to copy and paste for this year.
Yeah, and I feel like you're really good too, like year to year. Like one year you're just like, I'm not taking this dude. Like, I'm out at this price. And the next year you're like, yes, I'm in on this price. And last year Lawrence was kind of the second tier guy where he was like going off the board as like quarterback 7 or something like that, where he was like right around round 7, 8, somewhere in there off the top of my head, where you got to do something like legit at that price to actually be a good advanced rate player, to be a guy that you needed. And Lawrence obviously was not. Now the ADP maybe has swung too far where it's like, I can get this guy as my quarterback 2, or if you want to wait and do a 3 quarterback build, take Lawrence, like I think that's totally fine. So yeah, I'm with you. I'm in on this price for sure. I will add to context. Last year matters. Like down the stretch, we kind of forget, but Lawrence played every week injured with the right shoulder injury, his throwing shoulder. So he kind of toughed it out. He was missing practice like every week, right? And it was just like, I'm going to get out there and try to make us push to the playoffs. Obviously did not happen. So not to make excuses for players over and over again, but I do think that was a big factor last year. So now that the price is this, I'm in. I like him too.
Yep. All right, running back. We're going to give two names, and you have Tajay Spears, who the other day Jason accidentally called him Tajay Sharp. Same team, basically same name. It's fine. Tajay Spears.
I feel like Tajay Sharp, shout out to Tajay Sharp, by the way, who hasn't gotten a shout out on a podcast in probably 4 years, but like definitely was like a guy at one point where I was like, you know what, 3,300, like this is a good matchup. Yeah, why not? And it probably worked out once. But Tajay Spears is the guy we're talking about today. And you alluded to this last week. Like one of your biggest edges right now in best ball is the idea of fading the running backs that are going early because they're the teammate that are quote unquote the starter on paper, but they're kind of dead zone E type running backs where like the efficiency isn't great or just they're a similar projection to a guy going later. And to me, that's exactly what's happening with Tajay Spears. We've already heard this coaching staff talking about using both guys as a committee, yet Pollard goes way earlier than Spears, and I would not be shocked if at the end of the day we look back and say, yeah, maybe that Dallas season, that was kind of the start of the decline for Tony Pollard. This is a player who's 27 years old, and in every metric that we kind of look at as, explosiveness and efficiency, Tajay Spears was just better last year as a rookie. Now, obviously, when you think about players as a rookie, we expect them to kind of slowly build as the year goes on, but we really see these guys take a big step forward and be difference makers in year two, which is where Tajay Spears is at. So I'm looking at this situation and saying, if I'm betting on Tennessee, I want the more explosive player at this point in their career, and that is Tajay Spears, who, he's an older prospect. He wasn't like the cleanest prospect in the world coming out, but he showed some nice stuff last year. 7% explosive rush rate was way better than Tony Pollard's 4.4. Forced more missed tackles per attempt than Tony Pollard. He was better as a pass catcher with 1.27 yards per route run. Like, for a running back, that is a very, very strong mark. So I'm in on Tajay Spears. He's been one of my kind of favorite, RB2 or RB3s as part of zero RB builds, where he goes right around like 120 is kind of that sweet spot, that perfect range. I've got him a little bit higher, right around 111.
Yeah, I'm looking at our rankings right now. I'm a little lower than you, but I totally see it. And the thing about him, caught 50 passes this past year. That's a big deal for success in year two. I looked at like all the rookie running backs that did that, and basically they were able to maintain that level. So if you knew you were getting from Tajay Spears like a similar season from last year, I think you would be very, very happy, but there's room for so much more. So last year he finished as RB35. He's going as RB37. So it's there, and it's there for this offense to be more than what we think. We brought up the Titans as a wild card team. Like, who knows if Will Levis can get it together, but it's enough in best ball that you just roll the dice. And so would you stack him with Levis and maybe one other Titans player?
I think you can. I mean, I've taken him with Titan stacks or just as a, hey, I already have 5 wide receivers and a tight end. Like, I need a running back here to kind of go with one of my hero RB builds. Spears is there. That's perfect. So I think he's good because it fits so many builds regardless of what you're doing.
All right, medical question, which I have no understanding. I know he came to the league with his knee thing. And so in my head, irrationally, I think he's a ticking time bomb because he's got this Todd Gurley thing. And that's just how it is. Is there any truth to like that being a thing?
What's funny is Josh actually messaged me this morning. Apparently he doesn't have an ACL in his right knee, Papa Josh. And the old man injured it playing pickleball yesterday. So we were chatting this morning about his knee, and basically he and Tajay Spears, I mean, they're the same athlete at this point. But yeah, Spears, coming out of Tulane was like, this guy, hasn't had an ACL in his knee. Is this a concern short-term, long-term? It's so wild how certain players and, what factors go into like how you succeed with or without an ACL. It has to do with so many factors that we can't even talk about on this show, but like your strength, your stability, your control, all those things that you can work on and get there, but it's very, very rare. And when it happens, people can actually function without one. Now, it does kind of lead to an accelerated rate of arthritis in the knee. So there's a good chance Tajay Spears is not a guy that we're talking about on this show in 5 years or 6 years. but he's young enough right now, and all we care about is the season, right? So like for Dynasty, I'm kind of worried about Tyjae Spears, but for this year, I'm in.
So is it in your job description to be the team doctor for the entire company?
Actually,
is that in there? Okay.
Go to the,
just want to make sure
check my LinkedIn, you'll see that in there.
Okay. Yeah, I'll go to your Patreon, your exclusive Patreon. Okay, I'll give a running back. It's James Cook, running back for the Buffalo Bills, who down the stretch, James Cook was a force. I mean, we talked about him a lot in DFS, but when Joe Brady took over from Ken Dorsey, there was an OC switch, occurred in week 11. He averaged 20 opportunities per game. That's always kind of was the thing with James Cook. It's like, I don't know if they'll give him enough touches, but he averaged 15 fantasy points per game. And then more importantly, he was a big part of their passing game, 22.6% targets per route run. I've said this over the years, but a lot of times when there's vacated targets and there's, 56%, something like that, of the Bills' targets are gone with Diggs and Gabe Davis and Hardy and Sherfield. Like, they're all gone. The running backs often are the thing that are most constant year to year, and they get a little bump. So I think James Cook is kind of undervalued as a key part of this offense. The scary thing is always, okay, do they prefer Josh Allen around the goal line? Do they bring in Ray Davis around the goal line? I don't really care, because I think this is a player that's drafted at a really comfortable spot. And I'm going to go out to say, I've had builds where James Cook is my RB1. I've hammered wide receiver. I took a onesie position. And then James Cook at pick 55 is one of those guys that I'm just like, I'm in. I'm in with this offense. I'm in with him being a valuable part. He could easily get 50, 60 catches on this team where everybody's trying to guess which Buffalo wide receiver. Is it Coleman? Is it Curtis Samuel? Is it Matt Collins? And yes, I think that James Cook might be this team's, wide receiver 2 on this team, if you think about him that way. So he's been really unfortunate in the touchdown department, only 4 rushing touchdowns in 2 years. So I think that swings in a good direction. But James Cook, I have at 48th overall, RB12. I'm pretty bullish on him, and he'll be a lot of my builds this year.
Yeah, I think he's one of those guys that, when you're taking someone that's not a wide receiver in the first 5 rounds, like, you should have a good reason to do it, because on Underdog, like we talked about, if you're behind the 8 ball, like, you really can't make that up later. So you need to be selective about when you take a tight end, if you're going to, or when you take an elite quarterback, if you're going to. But James Cook is a guy that I will do that with, because it's a way to get access to one of the best offenses in football, like you said. It's a way to get access to a Josh Allen stacking partner, which I think is kind of unique, because like you said, everyone wants to figure out, is it Curtis Samuel? Is it Khalil Shakir? What if it's none of those guys, right? Like, that's also a possibility. And the usage in the passing game was so strong last year. So yeah, I like James Cook. He is one of those guys that I will take as part of my kind of one running back in that range type of builds. I'm with you. He was so explosive. And again, we always talk about too, like, for me in best ball, just targeting the archetypes of, like, this guy's on the ascension of his career where he's going to be peaking this year and having the ability to be producing big time down the stretch. James Cook obviously fits that bill. So yeah, I'm with you.
Yeah, he was 3rd in yards from scrimmage behind only CMC, Breece Hall, number 1 in yards before contact. Like, this is a good player they took in the 2nd round. We forget that. The range right after him is kind of also a point where, Pacheco goes right ahead of him. And then you have Rashad White, you have Joe Mixon, Kenneth Walker, Alvin Kamara, Aaron Jones. Like, these are guys that I don't love taking there, because then you have to take them as your RB2. I just find myself wanting to keep hammering wide receiver, or it's also a spot where we can get tight end. So this little range in like round 5, round 6 is where I'm taking Cook or one of the tight ends or a wide receiver. So let's take one more break and we'll be right back.
When you need mealtime inspiration, it's worth shopping Baker's, where you'll find over 30,000 mouth-watering choices that excite your inner foodie. And no matter what tasty choice you make, you'll enjoy our everyday low prices, plus extra ways to save, like digital coupons worth over $600 each week. You can also save up to $1 off per gallon at the pump with fuel points. More savings and more inspiring flavors make shopping Baker's worth it every time. Baker's, fresh for everyone. Fuel restrictions apply.
Wearing a Men's Warehouse outfit makes you confident, like you could do anything, so you dance like no one is watching, even though everyone is watching. Because of the Men's Warehouse outfit, you interview like the job is already yours because it is. Because of the Men's Warehouse outfit, you golf as if the rules don't apply to you because you're too well dressed for rules. Because of the Men's Warehouse outfit. At Men's Warehouse, get measured, get fitted, get hot, get confident in everything from tailored suits to underwear and all the stuff in between. Love the way you look at Men's Warehouse.
We're going to go through our wide receivers and tight ends we're a little bit higher on, and then we'll get to explain yourself. So, Betz, talk about Christian Kirk, because you've only talked about him, 5 times this offseason.
Yeah, this is the perfect compliment to Trevor Lawrence. Just get this stack, and I think you just print money. That's how it works. I've got him up at wide receiver 28. Not a ton ahead of market. He's at wide receiver 30 right now. Again, I think that's just his floor, right? I mean, that kind of feels like it, doesn't it? With the situation, you lose an elite player in Zay Jones, obviously, Kyle. You lose Calvin Ridley, but quietly, that combination vacates the 5th highest target share among all wide receivers in the league, the 2nd highest air yard share. And you might say, okay, the air yards probably go more towards the Gabe Davis, Brian Thomas Jr. types down the field. And I do think that probably in, a simplistic way of thinking about it makes sense. But those guys, I'm not convinced Brian Thomas Jr. is going to work, man. I've taken him because I want to bet on a first-round wide receiver and hope it works out. But in our dynasty discussions on the show, you brought up multiple times, his targets per route run for a first-round wide receiver, really, really bad. And that's a red flag to me. So I think I want to buy into Brian Thomas for hey, if it hits, it's going to hit in a big way. But the most likely outcome here is Christian Kirk's the guy you want, right? I mean, he's just good. Last year before the injury, wide receiver 23 in fantasy. He's going off the board well behind that. I mean, you think about the targets per route run numbers for Christian Kirk, it's him and Evan Ingram that see the volume. So I get that he's not the sexiest pick in the world. I get that he's not going to finish as a top 5 wide receiver. But as your wide receiver 3, that is money to me for Christian Kirk. And I love the fact that, like you said, because of how the ADP lines up, you can take Kirk. If you want to tackle on Ingram or something like that, you can. Wait later, grab Trevor Lawrence. If you want to throw Gabe Davis on that stack, you can. It doesn't affect your build too much. I think he's a really strong piece this year in the early 5th round, and I've taken him sometimes even in the 4th.
Yeah, it's the name thing. When people are drafting, they look at Christian Kirk and well, am I really going to get this upside that I want? But you need usable weeks. Think about, it's 4 wide receivers you want scores from every single week. And Christian Kirk's one of those players that can crack your top 4. So, there's a lot more volatility than we give credit. And so, yeah, Jaguars are a team that I'm just higher on. I love ETN as well. He's a little before Cook and Pacheco, but I like this team. I like this team as a bounce back spot, which is, like you mentioned, I ebb and flow, and I'm totally fine with that. Looking every single year going I don't really want to be in on this player. I don't think. And this year, I like the price. So Christian Kirk's fine.
Which is what you should do from a best ball standpoint, right? It's this guy was going in round 2 last year. That was just way too expensive. Oh, now he's going 4 rounds later and not that much has changed in his profile. Let's get him at a better price. That's what you should be doing if you're a good best ball player.
Yeah, you were taking Cooper Kupp. I was taking Puka. No, I wasn't taking Puka in best ball. That would have been way ahead of the
You wouldn't
game
be here if you were.
I was there.
You'd be rich.
No, I would have logged off. Yeah, we still need to work out those plans that when we win, and we will win, trust me. Podcast is over. It's just done.
It's just going to end that day. Whatever the day comes, that Sunday, let's say it's week 12, you win the Millie, there will be no podcast the following week.
It's so funny because we know the exact opposite is true. You and I want to get together hey, you want to talk about this week?
You want to talk about the state football game? Sure.
Yeah, that's what we'd continue to do. I think it's just part of what we get to do. Tank Dell. Have you heard of him, Betz? Because
I love Tank Dell.
I think people are now going to be even more scared off because Nico got the bag. It's this team loves Nico Collins. Well, I think CJ Stroud thinks Tank Dell's the best wide receiver on the planet, the way he talks about him. So we forget Tank Dell from weeks 9 to 12 before he got injured was the wide receiver 3. He was averaging 11 targets per game, 92 receiving yards. And he's so different because coming in the league, you saw all that volume he got at the University of Houston, and you're like, oh, this is a small wide receiver. He's just going to be a slot guy. They're going to give him a bunch of gimmicky stuff. 70% of his routes were out wide. He had 1 target all year behind the line of scrimmage. So he's not, I don't know, Zay Flowers. He's playing like a big boy. That's a little random drive-by shot right there. That was mean.
Jeez, Zay catching strays, man. What the heck?
I know. I feel so bad. But Nico and Tank is a good discussion. But this year we're adding Stephon Diggs. I think the Texans wide receivers are just, I don't understand the pricing that they're this far away from each other. Nico's wide receiver 15, Diggs 18, and then Tank Dell's all the way at wide receiver 26. You and I are both ahead of market, and we both have Diggs lower. So it's like Diggs probably won't end up on any of our teams. And Dell is one of those players that I want to buy into, and I want to buy into the upside of a guy that just commands targets. Now, the Texans team, I'll be honest, like I'm probably not going to have a ton of Texans stacks because I don't like CJ Stroud's price. We're a little bit lower. But I look later on in the year and I look at this team and I see, okay, well, there's some really good stacking options with this team late that I want to be in on, including Baltimore at the very end, a game in Houston, week 17. Like I'm going to have, trust me, Mark Andrews, Tank Dell, those guys are going to be correlated. They know each other on my team. So Tank Dell, I'm in on it, and he's going to show up on a lot of my teams. It's like a wide receiver 3.
Dude, I think he's my highest exposure right now is Tank Dell.
Really?
Yeah, and it is one of those things that I talked about this last week. Is one of my edges kind of that I think still exists is just really trying to be more diligent about fading the players that you don't think are going to be peaking when you need them to peak. Like if they're great in weeks 1 through 10, it doesn't matter, right? Like you need these guys to be producing at a high level and really having spike weeks in December and January. And it's like, is Stephon Diggs going to be doing that? I don't know. We haven't seen it in 3 years. Like last year he did it where he fell off a cliff. The year before, fell off down the stretch. Now, I think he's got juice left. Like I think he's still going to contribute for the Texans, but it's like, man, if I'm thinking about when I log into DraftKings in week 16 and I want to play a Stroud double, am I going to be clicking like Nico and Diggs, or am I going to be clicking Nico and Tank? And I'm pretty sure I'm going to be clicking Nico and Tank based off their archetypes, right? Like second-year wide receiver, we love betting on that. I think you're getting a little discount with the Stephon Diggs addition. But the thing about, Tank, especially for best ball, is when you want those spike weeks, you want the guy that's going to win down the field. CJ Stroud last year was second behind only Will Levis in ADOT. The dude is not looking to check it down. And Stephon Diggs' ADOT by year is decreasing year over year over year. And I think about how Tank Dell won, how Nico won last year. These guys were running big boy routes on the perimeter down the field. So I love Tank Dell for the upside and spike week potential there. And like I said, he's one of my highest exposure players this year.
I could just hear it in the background when we were going through Tank Dell. There's somebody out there, they're on the riding lawnmower, whatever they're doing. They're like, but the dude is small. He's going to get injured. He was injured last year. Correct me if I'm wrong, but his injury with his ankle was him getting rolled up on the goal line when he was blocking. Like it was just like and it was Dameon Pierce. What a jerk.
I had to throw that in there, didn't you?
Yeah, I did. But it was like a random injury. It was a freak injury, which happens.
Correct.
And Keenan Allen was one of those players that was labeled as injury prone. And what do you have, like a kidney injury? Like it was just freak stuff. And he's been pretty much an Iron Man ever since. So do you care at all about his injury stuff?
No, he should be fine. I mean, the timeline is really not concerning. He was already out there at OTAs in a limited capacity. And obviously we have a couple months till training camp. He should enter the season week 1 100% healthy.
All right, talk to me about the same thing that you have talked to me on this podcast for 3 years in a row at tight end.
The cheat code this year, ladies and gentlemen, is going to be Tank Dell and Mark Andrews in week 17. I'm in again, man. I mean, I'm in general. I will say I love Mark Andrews, and I want to talk about him in a second, but just the elite tight ends to me this year are a priority right now with how the landscape is in ADP. There's been years where it's like, I don't love this price on, so-and-so, or the top 3 guys are too expensive, and I actually kind of like the late round guys. This year, the exact opposite is true. Like, I can't really find a tight end going after round 15 that I'm like, I would love to add that guy on my roster. I will do it because you need 2 tight ends. I'm not excited about it. But this year, you get Kelce way cheaper than ever before. You get Dalton Kincaid as the potential top option in the offense. You get Mark Andrews as the definite top option in his offense. George Kittle is way cheap. For whatever reason, we're back in on Kyle Pitts again, right? Like all these guys, though, go from like the end of the 3rd round to like sometimes the 6th, 7th round. And like that window to me is a priority for tight end this year. And the guy that I keep coming back to for obvious reasons is Mark Andrews. And you look at, last year, what he did, it was great. But we kind of forget because he missed the end of the year. And that's kind of been the knock on Andrews is like, well, he had the ankle injury, and the year prior, the Ravens kind of fell off. But that was a Lamar Jackson injury, right? Like, we kind of are so quick to dismiss things in our mind and kind of remember the things that went wrong. But it really did go well for Mark Andrews last year. Among all tight ends, he was 4th in yards per route run, 5th in yards per target, missing, forced tackles. He was 8th per the reception. He was 2nd behind only Taysom Hill, Kyle, which is hilarious, in fantasy points per route run. Like, he is one of the true elite difference makers that still exists at tight end. And so when I look at this Ravens offense, and yeah, Zay Flowers is good, and I'm fine taking him, but like, he's expensive. Rashad Bateman's whatever. Like, it's Mark Andrews. Like, I don't know what we're doing here. Mark Andrews is going to be the top target earner in this offense, I think. And if that's the case, he should be able to outperform this ADP and potentially finish as the tight end 1, which was kind of my argument for him last year before his injury. And I will say too, like, it's not exclusive. If I miss out on Mark Andrews, give me Isaiah Likely. He's one of the late guys that I actually like. I mean, without Mark Andrews in 9 games, he's averaged almost 13 PPR points per game. So, like, he's good. We know that. They target the tight end at a high rate. They don't have a lot of other weapons. Like, to me, this is sort of a no-brainer at this ADP.
I love Mark Andrews. I just love him so much. I have him ranked 1 spot higher than you. So you better change your rankings, brother.
I'm going to adjust it right now.
I also looked at where we have these tight ends clumped. And you mentioned the elite tight ends are there in round 5 and round 6. And that's not normal. Usually you have to pay a much higher price. So in my rankings, I'm not going to ever have Sam Laporta. He's going 29th off the board. I have him ranked 46. Just not happening for me. But he's clumped together with Mark Andrews, then I have Laporta, then right after that, I have Trey McBride, and then Dalton Kincaid. They're all kind of right there as a tier where I have Kelce a little higher. We'll talk about him. But I just love this spot in your draft where for them to pay off as a 5th, 6th round pick is very different than what you were paying for Mark Andrews. We used to have to say like, oh, I got to stack Lamar and Andrews, at the 2-3 turn or whatever it was. It's very different this year. So I'm in. He's a touchdown machine. He's been one of my favorite players in the league, for a long time, and I'm ready to lose more money.
I mean, hey, man, we're right back. You take Mark Andrews, you take Antonio Gibson, you print money. That's just how this is going to work. The other thing, too, like with the tight ends that you talked about, I was just thinking about this as you were talking. The reason I think I keep going back to this range, and again, I'll take all the elite tight ends, but like Mark Andrews specifically, is like after Christian Kirk, there's not a lot of wide receivers I'm like actually excited to click in this range. Like you talked about the Chiefs guys, like Mark Andrews goes around like Xavier Worthy and Hollywood Brown. It's like, what are we doing? Like Mark Andrews is clearly a more talented, I think, better fantasy player or asset to have on your team than some of these guys that go there just because of Underdog's wide receiver landscape. So you can leverage that and say, look, I'll take my early wide receivers. That's fine. But when I get to round 5, round 6, like these wide receivers, there's so much downside and there's so many holes in their profile. Like Mark Andrews and Kittle and, Kincaid and all these guys, all the elite tight ends are awesome picks this year.
Yeah, right after Andrews, this is going to just be sad. Right after Andrews, the next wide receiver off the board is Keenan Allen. Rest in peace at 31. Terry McLaurin, 32. Rest in peace for you. And then you mentioned it's Hollywood Brown, Jaden Reed, Xavier Worthy, guys that I think we're just going to be lower on. Jaden Reed was almost the player I brought up of just like, hey, I'm almost a full fade at where he's going ADP. I want to mention Kelce because I've been on this podcast and every single year said the opposite. I'm out on Kelce. I just don't really love where he went the last 3 years. Last year, his ADP 6.3. The year before, 12.4. The year before that, 6.6. You're not having to pay that price this year because he's going as 37th off the board as the tight end 2. I have him as my tight end 1, just 1 spot ahead of that in ADP. So I'm not really changing that much of where he goes, but it's the cheapest he's ever been. And you can get a Kansas City stack, like you mentioned, way later where you can build out your room and say, hey, I've got 3 wide receivers, or, you took a stud running back and you got 2 wide receivers. You're going into round 4 and you can get Kelce and Mahomes. And that is very different than what we've ever seen. His target shares in the playoffs were incredible. 30%. I mean, that's something that you would kill for. And there is precedent for tight ends this old. Remember, he just signed an extension to give you a season, a top 5 season. Now, tight end 1, though, when we're drafting Travis Kelce as tight end 1, we're thinking about him as what is the rest of the field going to do? That's kind of what made him that difference maker a couple years ago. In 2022, his advance rate was 30%. Kelce was awesome. I think that's crazy to think he's going to be that good, but he doesn't have to be that good because you're getting him as the 3rd, 4th round pick. And that's what's just so different. So Kelce is somebody that I'm finally coming around to drafting, and I'm fine with it. I think he's still going to be the top option on this team, the most consistent player. And I think he's a really good bet to get 10 touchdowns, which at the tight end position, that's all you're looking for. Who are the players that get 10 touchdowns? There's not a lot of guys that can do that. I was looking through like all of them, like you mentioned, like who are the late round guys that could do it? Like Jake Ferguson could get 10 touchdowns, but he's going as like tight end 8, tight end 9. It's not that late compared to some other dudes.
He's like a
but
top
there's
80
nobody
pick
else
right now, isn't he?
Yeah, it's crazy that I was like, oh, Jake Ferguson feels like a guy I'd love to tack on. It's like, no, you kind of have to pay up for him a little bit. So what do you think about Kelce this year?
Yeah, I think the reason you're seeing the price come down is obviously because of what we saw last year, where he did play 69% of the snaps. That was his lowest since 2014, which is just crazy to think about how long this guy has been producing at the level he is. But we had that, and they talked about it, right? They said, look, we're going to keep Kelce a little bit more fresh for the playoffs. We're going to back off a little bit. But the dude was still the tight end 3 in fantasy. And the tight end 1, because remember, he missed a couple games. So on a points per game basis, he was tied with Laporta as the tight end 1 in fantasy. And that was still with playing less snaps. So yeah, if he plays 65% of the snaps, he's probably not seeing 150 targets. But he's seeing targets where it matters, around the goal line and in the end zone. And if he gives you 910, the upside is there for 10 touchdowns. That's going to be well worth this cost. So I'm in on Kelce, whereas like you, where it's like, man, you got to pay the 6th overall pick to get this guy on your team. Like, he can't just be good. He can't tie Sam Laporta. Like, he has to be elite. Now he can just be really good and be a pretty good pick. So I'm with you, especially considering that you can get Mahomes in the next round, make that stack way more affordable than it's ever been. And I will say on Kelce, you've been kind of the whisperer. Like, you've had a pretty good read, I think, when it's time to play him, whether it's DFS or in best ball. And when you're like, you know what, we're out now. So if you're in, I'm in.
Yeah, 5 touchdowns last year feels incredibly low for what Mahomes usually produces. So he should be good. One more segment. Let's go for it.
I'm quite well, thank you. No. Clearly you are not. No rational person would do as you have done. Explain yourself.
Nothing like a 20-second drop for the people.
That's what they come to this podcast for, Kyle.
I know Mike does great work. I'm not sniffing his farts either. Like, it's a fun part of the job to be able to say, we have fun drops. Like, our show has good quality stuff. So we're going to name a player the other person has way lower on their ADP. And we have no idea who they're going to name. So I'm going to let you go first because I am a gentleman, kind friend. I'm going to let you call me out.
A gentleman, a scholar, if you will. But Kyle, and dude, I'm so mad at you because you already brought it up. The player that I want you to explain yourself on is Josh Downs, who you already brought up a little bit, but I want to hear more about this. You have him 154th overall, almost 20 full spots behind ADP. You're basically telling the people you can't draft Josh Downs. But I want to remind you, there was a period last year during the season where it was like, who would I rather play in DFS? Is it Josh Downs or Michael Pittman? Because he is earning some legit volume. Now we get a player entering year 2. We love betting on year 2 wide receivers and good offenses, but not you. You're out on Josh Downs. Tell me why. Okay,
so it does pain me. Josh Downs, the pride of North Gwinnett High School here in Georgia. I've said this. He's Jamison Crowder. And to me, that is a player that you never need. It's nice to have him, but thinking of him as like a weekly player, flex player at best, you need touchdown upside. That was the only time that Jamison Crowder was great. So Josh Downs last year, he joined Jamison Crowder as one of 32 rookie wide receivers to see 50+% of the targets in the slot. I did some quick, when you said Josh Downs, like, oh, what stats do I have on him? I'll look it up real quick. The problem with players like that is year to year, there's so much volatility saying like, what is their outcome? So if he has a spike year and Crowder had a 7 touchdown year, that's great. It's hard for me to get there with Anthony Richardson. And so there's so many other wide receivers that I see there that I'm really, really open to, and not this low ADOT player. In fact, one of the criticisms of Anthony Richardson is that he could throw the ball 80 yards downfield, but it was really hard for him to throw the ball like 1 yard and these little short, like dinky screens. Like he's just so bad. I remember watching the tape, but the targets just never went to the slot last year. I mean, the Colts were 25th in the league in slot targets. I don't see that improving that much more when this Shane Steichen offense is going to be built around Michael Pittman. It's going to be built around running the football and occasionally getting A.D. Mitchell, involved. So what is his target share? Like, what would he command in this offense for you to get excited?
What do I think he's going to command, or what would I would expect if he's going to pay this off? I mean, probably somewhere around 17%, I would think. If Pittman's dominating with 25%.
Like as a median outcome.
Yeah, most likely.
And he could get to 20%, but I think he's Demario Douglas.
I mean,
I think
you see that guy's targets route run numbers, Kyle? Pop Douglas is pretty good.
I do see it. And the team said, cool, let's draft some other wide receivers because we don't really care about you. I think he's expensive Wandale or I don't know. It's hard for me to get there as a difference maker when there are some other wide receivers that I just want spike weeks from. I'm going to get the production if I've taken wide receiver earlier where when he's on the board, it's like, there's just 0 RB targets that I'm going for. So Josh Downs, if you're stacking with Anthony Richardson, I get it. But I'm just going to be lower on him, and it's going to pain me because I want him to be successful.
No, you don't.
But it's just not going to
happen. You wouldn't have him here if you didn't want him. The heart wants what the heart wants. I will say, I agree with a couple of the points, but we need to remember, what's so funny to me about best ball season, especially people that are in dynasty leagues, they just throw their priors at the window on players all the time. Think about the A.D. Mitchell discourse, the Brian Thomas Jr. discourse, all these things in the pre-draft process. It was like, A.D. Mitchell, when he actually tries, his tape is great, but his yards per route run numbers, his yards per team pass attempt, everything was terrible in his profile, except for he caught some touchdowns. And I know that people loved him, and that's fine. But would anyone be surprised if A.D. Mitchell in year one is it didn't really work out? But Josh Downs was the wide receiver 2 in this offense. They don't really use a tight end. He got a couple spike weeks. Anthony Richardson was awesome. I see the scenario where that plays out. So I'm taking him, but mostly only on my Richardson teams.
Yeah, that's a great point because I was actually pro Josh Downs last year when we were doing our prospect preview coming out of UNC. Yeah, like I said, I don't mind mixing it up. You don't have to just say this is what they're good for. I think Josh Downs has his place as a maybe flex player on your dynasty roster that you'll never use.
I will also say, year 2 Jameson Crowder, second year leap, 67 catches, 47 yards, 7 touchdowns.
Yeah,
you're telling me we're getting year 2 Jameson Crowder. I'm just saying. I would love that.
It's not the worst thing ever. He got second contract, big one, and still in the league somehow. It's crazy.
I don't know if he's in the league.
So I think he's running around with Washington.
Good for him.
But I could be wrong. Speaking of Washington, there's a player on that team that you, my friend, have. What you basically did is you went to their house, you took a big dump and just left. You just didn't even flush, man, because you don't even care about this player. You don't care about his upside. Why is it that you have Jaden Daniels ranked behind ADP when you know the formula for fantasy success is very simple? Are you a mobile quarterback, and can you take a leap? I get it. He's a rookie. But I know how much you love Cliff Kingsbury, so why don't you just love Jaden Daniels?
I'm not going to lie. This might just be one of those mistakes, so I need to check my rankings real quick and double check, because I have been taking actually a decent amount of Jaden Daniels, where it's like, if I want someone that can match the early ADP production from someone like Richardson or Hurts or Stroud, it's like, well, maybe Jaden Daniels could be that guy if he runs enough, as we've seen. So this could be a complete mistake. I will say that, and I will go back and check. And if it is, I'll move him up, and you'll see that come Saturday in the rankings. But I have taken Jaden Daniels. I do think he's a good pick. The tricky thing for me, though, with Daniels is like I don't have a ton of confidence in the stacking partners. It's like,
yeah, that's
like
tough.
I love Terry, but you just got to be realistic. Like Terry is what he is, which is like a back end wide receiver too, and it's fine. But Dotson was one of the worst wide receivers in football last year. Like, you know, we gave Quentin Johnson a really hard time. Like he was right there in yards per route run. Like the boys with less than one, it's quite a list, and he was on it. Luke McCaffrey, he's kind of a fun rookie to target. He was a 3rd rounder, but like he's kind of getting steamed up. And then the Senator, who we love, his ADP is borderline egregious now, right? It's like, what are we doing?
Yes.
Where he was going around 16, 17 a couple months ago. Now he's like, what, 150, like higher? He goes so high. Like, so I just think the expectations on the offense are a little mismatched. We have an under on their win total, but I agree. If Jaden Daniels runs, he's probably going to finish as a top 10 quarterback.
Yeah, that's the only problem. I agree with you. The stacking is not fun when I look at this team. Week 17 is against the Falcons. So there is like some fun little correlation plays that I have in my mind. But yeah, I don't love paying the price for any of these dudes. He's going off the board as QB 12, 104th. So you're not really that far. You're like 10 picks behind.
Okay.
But I'm ahead of market on him, thinking that I'm just going to take the gamble because I get him as a QB 2. And that's a really fun player to bet on the rushing production. I sadly have not been taking very much Terry McLaurin. Have you? I know he's your boy.
I haven't.
Yeah. It's hard when you look at team exposure and you're like, oh, I want to be in on this player. And then you start breaking down where certain players are going, and it just gets really, really hard to. So yeah,
if you're taking Daniels, though, who
who
are you stacking him with if you're passing on Terry?
Dotson.
What could go wrong? What could go wrong?
Why not? You know, wide receiver 62. I mean, classic best ball. I mean, he doesn't have to do that much for me, right? He's like my wide receiver 6.
I mean, truthfully, yeah, that's actually true. If he can give you like 4 spike weeks,
which he did last year,
Dotson's probably
just at a terrible price.
Probably a totally fine pick.
Yeah. All right. Well, so the best part about our rankings is they don't stay stagnant. They will be updated all throughout the summer. Summer Best Ball will be hanging out with you guys. We got some more good episodes coming up for you in June. We'll even be doing a live draft. So if you want to draft with us, we would love for you to be a part of that. Betz, tell everyone goodbye.
Dude, June 1st is here. UDK Plus season is upon us. Best Ball season is well upon us. Enjoy the summer. Enjoy the best Ball rankings. Enjoy the primer. Check that out. If you guys see anything you have thoughts on, want to share a little feedback, want to chat, let us know. We're in Discord. We'll see you next Friday. Have a great week.
Thank you for listening to another edition of the Fantasy Footballers DFS and Betting Podcast. Don't forget to visit us on the web at thefantasyfootballers.com.
This episode is brought to you by Hotels.com. When I went on my last holiday to Cape Town, it was amazing. My friends were there, the weather was phenomenal, and most importantly, the food was fantastic. But one thing I struggled with was finding the right places to stay. You know, all I want is a great bed, a fantastic shower, and breakfast that doesn't end at 8 a.m. I'm on holiday, I'm still sleeping. I also like ease, and the Hotels.com app easily helps me to find a perfect hotel for every trip. Whether you're looking for a family-friendly getaway or a relaxing spa weekend, on the Hotels.com app, you can compare up to 5 hotels side by side. Now, why would you want to do that? So you can see prices, amenities, and star ratings. And best of all, you don't have to switch back and forth between options. See? Ease. So, start planning your next getaway and find your perfect somewhere in the Hotels.com app today.